Hey everyone, Sean Frangella here from motiontutorials.net with a brand new tutorial about my top 5 features of Cinema 4D R21. So it is 2019 and Cinema 4D R21 was announced recently, and there's some big changes to the product, some big updates to the interface, and a lot of new features. So I want to get right into all the updates because this one is a pretty big one in my opinion, both on how the product is sold and looks, and a lot of fun new features, which is always what I like to dive right into. Let's get right into my top 5 list. Number 1, new price 1 version. So the biggest news when Cinema 4D R21 was announced is that there's one version, so there's no more Studio Broadcast Prime. You can see right in this graphic that they put together on Maxon's website. There's one version of Cinema 4D, which is great because I feel like the last few years that was getting a little confusing for a lot of studios and people who were used to Cinema 4D and working with different people who had different versions, and also for people getting into Cinema 4D, just knowing, even if you're watching a tutorial or learning the product, it's my version, it's all the same version, and that's great in my opinion. And the other big news as part of that is there is a new subscription model and price structure, which if you're just getting into 3D or you work at a studio and you need to open up a couple seats, in my opinion, is great, works a lot easier. It's a lot more easy for people to understand what the cost is and even how you get the product. So their new structure is based on monthly. So basically, if you sign up for a year, it's about exact the same price as Adobe's Creative Cloud, which people can understand what $59.99 a month means. You can explain it to your boss or justify the cost of that monthly, and it's just a lot easier to understand. So previously it was this perpetual idea, and that's something you could still buy outright if you wanted to, but it makes it a lot more flexible if you need to jump in for a month or two. Maybe you have some freelancers, or you want to sign up for the year but break it down to a monthly cost. Basically, it would take you about 5 years to catch up to what the licensing would have cost for the full one, and that's the annual subscription, and it comes with Cineversity, which is a great tutorial website. And there's even options now to add Redshift, which is part of the Maxon family now. So that's probably the biggest overall feature, is just how the product is sold and how it gets in the hands of customers. All right, let's keep going. Number 2, modernized updated UI. So here I have Cinema 4D R21 open, and I'm running the project from my title sequence in the new version. And you can see right away things look a little different, feel different, and something seems kind of newer, more modern. And at first it might just seem like the interface is a little darker and easier on the eyes, but there's actually a lot that went into this and a lot that really just freshens it up and helps. Probably the biggest thing that's noticeable is that it runs on HD monitors much better. It's optimized for higher resolution displays. So this laptop I'm recording this on, I'm running at 2800 by 1800, and it looks perfect. And just for comparison, if I jump back to R20 that I have here, same project, it just feels so much less modern and fresh. It's really hard to look at the new one for even a couple minutes and then jump back. But it goes a lot further beyond just the resolution. You can see the icons look a little different. The menu on a Mac even looks a little different and updated. And in our object manager, there's a lot of little tweaks and updates. So this is more than just the resolution. This is a full revamp of the entire interface, how it looks, how it functions, where things are, and this is a big move for workflow in my opinion. There's a lot of little stuff that you'll notice as you get up to speed. One thing that I really like that's great is in the object manager, there's new icons for everything. Things are a lot clearer. If you even look at the lights, the color of the icon changes for the lights. It just feels like it's a lot clearer, and there's a lot of thought and care that went into all of these little details in iconography. The other thing is that on a Mac, it's not a application that's sitting with all the menus separated within its own system. Whereas if we look at R20, you can see the main menu is just Cinema 4D and window, and everything is down here and built in. And that's fine, but everything else on a Mac works like this in this system, and there's a lot of positives to working like this. That's one of my favorite things is now that the menu is all just part of a standard app menu that you would expect on a Mac, you can always jump into help, and if you don't know where something is, say you want to type in cloner or something like that, anywhere on a Mac in any menu, you can always go to help, type in a menu command, and it'll pop open what it is. So say, I don't remember where the cloth dynamic is I really just want to know where that sits in the menu, you can always type that in, and it's a quick way to search. Now, if you're a lot quicker and you prefer the shortcuts, you can still do your tried and true Shift-C for that sort of thing. But it's just one of those little things that makes a lot of sense and helps combine everything and make it feel like it's one solid app running in the best way possible. Another note with the interface is the buttons have all been refreshed. There's new default buttons for some of those recent features that have been introduced into Cinema 4D. So if you're doing things like building with volumes or field forces, which we'll get into a little later, or even just having a nice default button for our cloner system and all of our effectors, it just makes so much sense, and there's a lot of little details throughout the interface that just make it feel much more complete. So this is a minor technical update as far as just exciting new features, but it really changes your everyday use of Cinema 4D. So this is a big one, and it's great. Moving right along, number 3, new bevels. So this is probably my favorite new feature as a motion designer and someone who's working with text and objects and bevels a lot. You're always beveling stuff in Cinema 4D. You're always making text and extrudes. And previously, if we take a look at caps, this is what we had. We had fillet cap on the front and back. This is our standard text and MoText. We're always doing this. And then your options are really just linear, concave, convex, half circle, one step, two steps. So you could do some stuff, but there was no way to build your own or really go beyond that. And this is a project file that I put together on a previous version of Cinema 4D. So you'll see, even if I open up an old one, there's now this migrate option, which is great. So if you know there's a new way of doing something in the new version from an old project file, there's a lot of buttons that pop up like this. And if I click migrate, now it's migrated my MoText to all the features of R21. And if I take a look at caps, this menu looks pretty different. And let's just take this word motion and put it into a new file so we can talk specifically just about these caps. So now, rather than 2 repetitive processes of adding a start end cap, you have one bevel and you just check start and end cap. Or if you wanted a front and back one be with different settings, you could click separate bevel controls. But most of the time, we want it to look the same. You don't want to do the same step twice or link things together. And the big update now is on this bevel shapes, size, and all these settings within this menu. So if we click bevel shape, it looks like there's less, but there's actually a lot more control because there's an infinite amount of possibilities you can do with the new system. So if we just had round, that's kind of our standard default bevel that we might be used to. And I'll put on the garage shading lines with NB so we can see what this is doing. So we have round bevel with the size of 5. And if we turn up the segments, we got our rounded bevel. We can increase that, decrease that. That's great. We have solid bevel, which is our standard kind of chiseled bevel. Step, which we can now increase to as many steps as we want. So before there's 1 step, 2 step, now we could have 100 steps if you want. And it's really taking the idea of steps and just letting you customize it. But the big control and update is this curve. And what this means, if you open this up and take a look, it gives you this Bezier curve. And this means the bevel could be whatever you want. So by default, it's just going from 0 to 1 on a straight line. So it's our default bevel. But we could command click and make new points and bend that curve, bend it backwards for an inner kind of bevel. Or we could command click, make a bunch of points, and go completely nuts and really customize this bevel to whatever we want it to. So look at that, just with a couple of clicks and a couple of drags of this bevel and adjusting our Bezier curve, now we have this totally custom bevel that is something we never could have done by default in Cinema 4D. And this is huge in my opinion. This just gives you so much control over customizing. You can just use Bezier curves to bend and adjust this. You can take the whole thing and adjust the shape depth, so it's taking that idea of the curve and making the whole thing bigger. You can bring it negative, so it's cutting in. Adjust your segments just like always, and you can save presets. So if you're doing motion graphics and doing text, we can say curvy bevel 10 step, and then say we had another text object, and let's just mess this up real quick and say we made a bunch of adjustments and we realized we want to use our preset, we can just load preset, grab that curvy preset. But you probably noticed that when we do load preset, you also get all of these custom presets to start from. So if you're in a hurry, you just want to make some cool bevels, not only can you make your own, but you can just grab a preset, drop it on, get so much more flexibility than you could before, and really massively upgrade the way you're making bevels. Seems like a silly thing to be this excited about, but this is a really big deal for adding a lot of details that's going to catch a lot of lighting and look nice for motion graphics. And it applies to wherever you're making bevels before. So if you had an extrude object with a circle, it's the same thing now. We can go to that extrude object, hit up caps, load preset, and look, there's my custom preset, grab some different presets, and you can really elevate your motion graphics a ton with this one simple little new feature. Number 4, field forces. So this is a really big feature in Cinema 4D that can get really fun and sound really complicated really fast. So I'll try to keep it simple and to the point and get through this as an overview in a minute or two so you can understand what field forces are, what you can do with them, how you can build in it, how it changes your workflow, and get back to what you were doing. So fields were introduced in R20, and in R21 they go even further. So if you're not familiar with fields from the last version, just a quick update. Here in this project, I have some text and it's scaling, rotating, and animating in by some basic plane effectors. And if I jump out of my camera, all that's happening is those spheres are moving from left to right. Nothing too crazy, but tried and true, good MoGraph animation. Now, if I take a look at either of those and go to fall off, I can click switch to field. And in R21, rather than having fall off on each effector and changing the shape, now there's fields, so I can do the same sort of thing. I can add a spherical field, scale that up, and if we move that back and forth, we can see it's doing basically the same thing. And the sphere has size controls, it has fall off controls. So you're probably wondering, what difference does it make? It looks like it's exactly the same. Well, the big difference that was introduced in R20 with fields is you'll see that it's a different object in the object manager. And this was huge because now if we had different effectors or different systems of animation and we made it for one and we have some other words and we want to do the same thing or copy it, it's an object now. It's not just buried on the fall off tab of an effector. So I can take that, copy it, and I have a copy of it, can make changes, move it around, make adjustments, and then for my other plane effector, I could drag that copy in, and I can mix and match fields for fall offs, change them easily, copy them easily. So that was a big step. Let's get to what's different in R21. Well, here we have a similar idea with a MoGraph setup where we have a cloner made of a bunch of spheres, and there's a plane effector to push some of these objects back in Z space, and rather than the fall off, now we got a spherical field, and that's pushing them back. Cool, great, that's MoGraph animation. But what if we want to take this further and bring it into other areas of Cinema 4D, like dynamics and simulations, but carry over the same sort of system? Well, that's why the idea of these fields being this separate object in the object manager matters so much. So let's take that idea of this spherical field as an object and talk about how we could use it now with dynamics and in other areas. Well, let's make these spheres dynamics. We'll do simulation, rigid body. It's going to default to apply a tag to children, individual elements. That's great. Let's turn off this plane effector for now, and the spheres fall down. We all know that one. And let's just make a quick ground and just add our simulation collider body. So we get our standard dynamic simulation where our spheres fall, they bounce around on the ground, and they have dynamic animation to them now. Well, what if we want to use the same spherical field but have it act as a force in various ways to do things like push the spheres away, pull them towards an object, and not get too deep in the weeds about recreating a whole system, but just take our spherical field we already made. Well, now we can do that. If we go to simulation forces, these might look familiar to our particle systems of past, But now if we grab field force or any of these, let's just grab a tractor. For fall off, it has that same fields tab. So I can turn back on my spherical field, pull that into the fall off, move that spherical field around, scale it up, turn our tractor strength way up just for the sake of making sure we're seeing something. And now you can see that they're being pulled towards that as they fall down. So this is a really quick and easy way to work and change dynamics and get realistic simulations with them. You can change settings on our force objects. We can make it negative so they actually are pushed away from our object, and you can see what that's doing. And it's not just a MoGraph system, it's actually pushing it. So we could animate this spherical field. So let's try that real quick. Let's just go to coordinates, animate, and we'll have it at 0 at the beginning and then just have it move around so we can see what's happening over time. So let's say it goes and moves in Z and X back and forth. And now we have this object that's moving and pushing those and affecting the force around those. So it's a big system that you can add to a lot of things. It works in a very modular way. This is just a tiny little idea starter of how forces work. I'll put together a bigger tutorial on it once I have time to wrap my head totally around everything you do. But it really works great for taking the idea of fall off for MoGraph animations, making everything a modular object, and making everything just work together in Cinema 4D in easier ways without every different type of animation like MoGraph and Dynamics having a totally different system of working. Number 5, image denoiser. So here we have our title sequence again for the channel, and I actually want to revert this, so I'm just going to use that help shortcut, figure out where revert is. Of course it's in file, but just want to throw that tip in there. And here's this original animation. So this isn't that complicated of an animation. There's not complicated textures there, but if we jump into a close-up shot of this, render a quick still frame, we can see that there's some noise in the render, because if we take a look at our render settings for physical, they're at low. So what would we usually do if we want to get rid of that noise? Well, we turn our render settings way up and just rate 700 hours for one frame to render, or we take it to something like After Effects and add post-production denoiser. Well, now we can do that right in Cinema 4D as well. If we just go to Effect, Denoiser, it's even lit up in yellow so you know it's a new feature, so that's cool. We'll add that, and it's going to give you this pass option, which I'm sure means something, and the option to save the raw image as a separate layer. And then we're just going to render this again, and that denoiser is added on after the render. So the same way as if you add a post-production glow effect from a material, see it's noisy, and then as soon as it gets done and catches up, we'll get a little bit of information, the details, and watch this. Bam, we see when it finished, there was that extra little pass of the denoising, and if we switch between these two, it's minor, but you can really see how that makes a difference. So having that built into Cinema 4D, it just gives you another option of how to best optimize your render, always thinking of not just turning the render settings up, but using post-production techniques like that. And it gives you the option if you want to save it as a separate pass. So those are my top 5 features of Cinema 4D R21, but it's by no means all the features. Those are just the ones that I was intrigued about and liked the most. If you're into character animation, there's the new Mixamo control rig, which is great. You can see this quick video that Maxon put on their website to show how that works, as well as a lot of updates to node-based materials. If that's your thing, that makes me kind of terrified, so I don't want to try to get into that or figure that out right now, but I know you can do a lot with it. There's an update to the content browser and how that works. So it's a big update. There's a lot of shiny big new features and a lot of small updates that just help workflow and the way it looks and the way the product works. So I hope this was a useful tour of some of these features. As always, you can check out more motion graphics, Cinema 4D, and After Effects tutorials at motiontutorial.net, and be sure to subscribe at youtube.com/Sean Frangella. And if you have any questions, you can hit me up on Twitter. I'm at Sean Frangella, or check out the Facebook page at facebook.com/motiontutorials. And be sure to check out some of those other videos and tutorials that are popping up in those thumbnails. As always, thanks for watching. I will see you at the next video.